Welcome to Botcasters, the podcast dedicated to bringing you the latest news, insights, and expert opinions on conversational AI, chatbots, voicebots, and the future of innovation in this field. We are proud to announce that we are working together with the European Chatbot Conference in Edinburgh, and we will be interviewing interesting speakers. We want to provide independent and objective knowledge for our community, share real-world successes and failures, and connect people with the expertise that they need. It has been a great and fun journey so far. A big shout out to all the experts that were on Botcasters and shared their expertise and vision. Be sure to subscribe to the Botcasters podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and follow us on social media. Hope to talk to you at the European Chatbot Conference in Edinburgh. See you soon. Welcome, Gabriel Skantze from Stockholm.
Thank you for having me.
Please introduce yourself.
So, I'm a professor in conversational AI at the KTH, Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. I've been doing research in this area for about 20 years now. And I'm also a co-founder of and a chief scientist of a company in Stockholm called Furhat Robotics that develops a social robotics platform. So I'm sort of dividing my time between these two things, and very exciting area.
I can imagine. Now, you're also one of the speakers at the European Chatbot Summit in Edinburgh. And you have this beautiful title, which you need to explain to me. It says, Turn-Taking in Conversational Systems. Please elaborate. What does that mean?
Yeah, so if you're interacting with like ChatGPT, turn-taking, that is who is supposed to speak or type now, that's not a big issue, right? So you're the same in a chat. If you're chatting with someone, you're writing something and you hit the return button and the turn goes over to the other person. In a spoken conversation, it's not so clear when your turn is over and I'm supposed to say something. And also in the middle of a conversation, we might insert small feedback sounds like and so on. So this is actually once we try to take ChatGPT and make it into a spoken interaction with a system like this, you very quickly realize that this is a major problem. And if you have talked to any of these assistants, you know that it's quite frustrating because you ask something, it takes a couple of seconds for it to answer. Sometimes it just cuts in the middle of your question and so on. Whereas this is not really the case between humans, or at least if that happens, we are very good at figuring out how to resolve it and so on. So we have this kind of very quick back and forth. We can do that at least as humans, that these systems currently do not really handle very well.
So what are you gonna? What kind of knowledge are you gonna share with us over there? Because if it's specifically on voice, as I understand it. So that's one thing, and we know voice is growing, and that's one of the things I find interesting, by the way, is that for a long time a lot of focus was on text, but if you think about people that are blind or have a problem with eyesight or have a hard time reading and writing, illiterate, or come from a different country, have a hard time speaking Swedish or Dutch or English or whatever. With the technology we currently have, we can easily translate into their language, and they can speak in their language, and we can recognize it and speak back. So I think that so the shift is coming, it's happening, and hopefully in due time, all systems are multimodal. You can speak and write in any language. So that's what I hope. Having said that, what are we going to learn there? Because apparently it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are some sort of from a more design perspective, there are a lot of things to think about once you try to make your written interaction spoken. So if you just plug in your chatbot into a speech recognizer and speech synthesizer, you might not get what you expect in the end. So there are things you can do from a design perspective to facilitate turn-taking and letting the user know when sort of they are expected to speak and not, and also issues about like, should you allow the user to interrupt? So that's one part that you can do with current systems. But there's also the research that we are doing at KTH, trying to figure out how we can use AI and machine learning to build better systems that can actually detect the kind of signals that we use in conversation to figure out when the system should speak and not, and maybe even have the system, while you are speaking, trying to plan what to respond and being ready to respond, just like we humans do in a conversation, and insert feedback while you are speaking and so on. So I don't think this is not just an issue of supporting, for example, people with disabilities, which is also important, of course. But I think we will more and more go from written interaction to spoken interaction, because you can use that in so many situations. Imagine having a pair of smart glasses, for example, that Meta, for example, have.
The Ray-Ban Meta ones.
Yeah, exactly. So imagine you have those. You're not gonna type. You're gonna want to talk to them. And in VR, for example, you want to use speech. You can't really type in a good way. And also the thing we are doing with Furhat with social robots. Of course, you will talk to these robots. So I think more and more we will see that we will be talking to this system and not typing to these systems. And once we get there, yeah, we have to address this issue.
And having said that, do you think that that technology is then going to, well, maybe not replace, but if you look at customer service, for instance, or sales calls, so we saw the examples on the internet coming by, software already doing sales calls of an hour. And I don't know if it was made or it was an actual call that was done by the AI. But that was impressive. And if you get to that level, I mean, where does this leave the humans?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think if you want to do sales call, I think that's already a bit problematic to receive sales calls that you haven't asked for. But getting that from a system, from a computer, is probably even more annoying. So I think that's something we have to be very careful about. But I think that much of this technology is going to complement humans. I don't think it will necessarily replace them in all these areas, but there are certain things that humans still will be doing better than computers. And sometimes we definitely want to talk to a person and not to a computer. So I think we'll see different use cases where this is happening. But I think as soon as we are talking to a system, I think we want that system to be able to support the kind of interaction that we have as humans.
And how far are you in your research?
So we have developed some very exciting models that are basically the way we do this is that we have a machine learning model, and we feed it with hundreds of hours, not thousands of hours of human conversations, recorded human conversations. And basically we ask the model to continuously through the conversation guess what's going to happen the next 2 seconds of that conversation. So just like a language model guesses next word in a conversation, we are in a spoken conversation trying to guess who is going to speak next within this 2 second time window.
Who and what? It's both.
Not what actually at this point. It's actually who, but so that's what it's learning about this turn taking. But in order to guess who is going to speak, it has to figure out what kind of things people are actually what kind of signals they're saying. So for example, if I say something with a sort of falling tone, that might be a signal to you that I'm sort of yielding the turn to you. Whereas if I make a pause and just have a sort of a more flat pitch, or say a filled pause like or something, that's a signal to you that I have something more to say. But all those signals are quite subtle, and you can find them everywhere. And also in the gaze signals, if we are sitting together, those are also important. But our models learn to pick up those signals without us sort of having to instruct them what those signals are, because in order to be able to guess who is talking the next 2 seconds, it has to pick those up and learn those cues. So if we apply this model to a conversation and see the predictions, it's very impressive that it can actually make quite accurate predictions of what's going to happen in the conversation, who's going to speak next.
And then a weird question. Could you use that software then eventually the other way around? For instance, we know with deep fakes and stuff like that you would be able to analyze conversations and say, okay, this doesn't make sense. This is made by AI. And these are not real humans.
I think that's a very interesting use case. You could definitely use it for that and analyze whether a conversation is likely to have been produced by humans or not. Absolutely. I also think you could use it as a diagnosis tool. So if someone is not talking in the way that the model would predict, it could perhaps indicate a certain condition. So I think there are a lot of interesting use cases which are not directly related to conversational systems.
Yeah, I talked to, I recorded also with one of the other speakers, or she's a panelist, and she did research on NLP, on cognitive something. I forgot exactly what it was, but basically what they research is if it changes the way it speaks, if you could predict Alzheimer or stuff like that. Yep. And it's really interesting. And I think that sort of coincides with what you're doing if you use it the other way around. And I know for a fact there's companies that have a hard time when they do selling by the phone, and they need to comply with rules and regulations. And how do you establish if that recording was real or cut? Or, that's what happens also with, companies that are a bit fraudulent, and they sell you a contract. You never said yes, but all of a sudden you said yes to their question. And in that context, it didn't make sense. So the question is, could you sort of automate the review of all those recordings to see if a contract is legitimate?
That's a super interesting. I haven't thought about that application actually, but that would be a super interesting application, definitely.
And another one, which if you know people that you recorded are telling the truth, if they are all telling the truth, there's thousands of hours, right?
Yeah.
Would you be able to use it as an indicator if someone is lying?
Yeah, that's very tricky. People have actually done a lot of research on trying to detect deceptive speech, but that's really hard to do. And I think partly for the reason that it's hard to define what is deception, and do you know? I mean, yeah, what kind of data do you have where you actually know that someone is lying or not? And of course, yeah. The use of that kind of technology is also, I think, ethically very, very troublesome.
But I can imagine there are government institutions that would be interested in applying that if they're not already applying some of that software, especially facial recognition, and they're already doing that in interviews, in police interviews.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's a problem. Not so much because I think the problem is if people are relying on this technology too much, so they can filter out people and so on based on these kind of things, where even if the technology doesn't work very well. And you might just scare people. If you say, I have a lie detector here, it doesn't matter if it works. People will sort of be more reluctant to contact you anyway, and sort of it will have its purpose, but it's not for the right reasons.
It's psychological then, more than technological. Okay, so we sort of went a bit off topic, but you inspired me of the if you start thinking about everything that's possible, which up to now was sort of impossible. It's crazy that what I see is it starts to become limitless. Sort of whatever you can imagine is sort of, well, not always possible, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, at least a lot of the things that we imagined before and made science fiction movies and so on are suddenly not so far away. At least some version of it. Like if you saw this movie Her a couple of years ago with a man that falls in love with his assistant, the kind of conversation they have in that movie was like, at that point, I thought that would be like, I don't know, 30 years away or something. But now with these large language models, we're not there yet. And one of the things is actually the kind of turn taking they have and so on, and the kind of the way they speak. But if you look at the content of the conversation, it's suddenly not that far away with these large language models. So yeah.
And what's that like for you as an academic, as a professor teaching students that we're coming from somewhere where, you know, everything was difficult and hard to get to. And now all of a sudden it's sort of, well, if you can imagine it, you can almost build it. That must be amazing to teach in this era.
It is, and it's really great to see that what the students are doing with it. I mean, we're teaching about the technologies, but suddenly, yeah, you can build all these kind of systems. So, just one example of something that wasn't possible a few years ago. We have a collaboration with the medical hospital here, where they are educating medical students, and one of the things we're developing now is a virtual patient. So you can, the medical student can talk to a robot that is a virtual patient and see what it's like to have a conversation with a patient. And that was something, of course, we could think about a few years ago, but now we actually have that, and we're actually trying it out in real education scenarios. So yeah, a lot of things we imagine we can now build at least prototypes of them.
That's so funny because up to now, at least in Holland, they use actors for that to train the
exactly.
students that patients do not react in a standard way. And how do you deal with that? They're angry, they're sad, whatever. Yeah. But with an LLM, you can say, okay, I want you to take this emotion and take this route. And that is, but here's actors are losing their jobs.
yeah, maybe, yeah. But I think this is a whole application area for conversational systems. That, I mean, mostly I guess people say chatbots and so on. You think about customer service and so on. But I think there are so many applications that we can now do. Of course, the whole game industry, but also this conversation, what I would call conversational training. So learning to talk to a patient is one conversational training scenario, but you could use it for learning a language, of course, to converse in a new language. You could use it to learn how it is to go to a job interview or to have a job interview, or for people who are a bit shy and sort of maybe are on the autism spectrum, they can now train having small talk, for example. So there are a lot of these super exciting applications that are not like customer service that are now possible. So I think that's amazing.
Yeah, and if you start thinking about that, you also think, why in a lot of situations can't I talk to an AI doctor? I know that'll be considered a medical device. I understand there's FDA approval and all that. But if you take a step back, quite a large percentage of the questions we have are actually, as patients, are for the doctor, they're standard, they're repeating. And there's maybe 20% or 30% that is, different and very hard. And I'm not talking about the heavy oncological cases, but the general stuff, people that are not dying or very sick. So that AI doctor could be available 24/7.
Yeah, although I think once we start doing that, I think we have to be very careful with these language models, but because still we have this problem of hallucinations. So we should be very careful to check. I mean, the scenario I described where you have a virtual patient, that's not such a big issue if it's hallucinating, because
it's actually good.
It's good. It's supposed to hallucinate, but nothing very important is at stake. So that's sort of fine. But yeah, if you have medical advice, of course, that could be extremely, or legal advice for what happens if it starts to hallucinate legal advice, that could have very big consequences. So I agree, it's great, but it's also something to be very, very careful about.
But I totally agree. We have to be careful about it. But if you take it from, we have a shortage of doctors. Our population is aging. We know we're going to get more questions. People are lonely. So your robot might be, there are already robots known to do that. So if you take a step back, then it helps us make the doctors become more scalable as professionals.
Sure. Definitely.
And I would and drive down the cost of healthcare, because that's another problem, and take away the frustration of having to wait, because that's another thing. I have a question now, I want an answer now, and you can choose. I wouldn't mind asking a question to a chatbot. Actually, there was research done in Holland where this was on the financial side, that if people talk to a robot, not a robot, a chatbot, on financial matters, they had less fear of full disclosure, of being honest about debts or other things, than talking to a person. So it actually, how do you explain that? People were easier to give information. It was the opposite of what you would expect, that they would be more careful. But if they know it's from a trusted source, say, this is here to help you, this is our first stage, share all the information, we'll analyze it, and then have the conversation with a human later while you have prepared and it actually works. People are very lenient to give information and more information and get help better. So I think there's a sort of a new balance is going to be there, of humans and chatbots or voice bots or whatever we want to call them, working together to serve customers, patients, what have you, to make our lives better, easier, and maybe drive costs down of whatever we're doing in society, and get some extra time, maybe free time for the doctors, because they have crazy hours. I don't know what it's like in Sweden, but here it's not good.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's all about finding this balance, and you asked before about, like, will people lose their jobs? But I really also believe that you have to find that balance at having these systems doing what they are good at, and then a human. So definitely, if you want to do some first screening and so on with one of these systems, I think that's and then getting in contact with a human once the system has figured out the basic stuff and so on. I think if you can find that balance, it's extremely promising.
And I wouldn't be surprised that what you're doing research on will add to that. Basically, the digital doctor's assistant calling the patients to prepare the appointment and feeding that data into either an AI system or just the medical record. And basically, the doctor prepares the meeting and say, "Oh, okay, I know." And immediately can move or order even blood tests or other screenings before the appointment to do things faster. Interesting.
Yeah,
If there was if you could give a takeaway or an important message to the people coming to the event and to you, what would it be? An important learning.
I think one important learning from the talk will be that speech is different than text, and that if there is a lot of things you can do in a spoken interaction that you can't do in a written interaction, but you can't just expect to get that by connecting your chatbot to speech input and output. There are more things to think about in order to benefit from the sort of rich kind of interaction that speech really is. So that's, I think, is the main take-home message from my talk.
And it's not as simple as it looks, because
No,
I think that's what the conclusion is. You don't just connect; you need to do more work on that. And it takes more money to get it right.
Yeah, and there is a lot of need for development and research in this area of how we actually connect these things. And people might see one speech synthesizer that sounds amazing, that can imitate Donald Trump or something, and then you expect you can just connect that to your chatbot, but it doesn't work because it's not supposed to speak in the right way you do in a conversation, sending the right kind of cues that you do in a conversation, as if you are just reading out some text, like you do when you read an audiobook or something. So that's what we have to figure out. How is the speech actually reflecting the intentions of the agent in the right way in a conversational setting?
Well, I'm really curious how this all plays out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it all goes faster than we can imagine right now. Gabriel, thank you very much. See you in Edinburgh, and good luck with your talk.
Yeah, thank you.
Why is it not stopped?